Snow fell like a white curtain, erasing the secret proving grounds in northern Europe. A multi-million-dollar supercar slid sideways across the ice, completely out of control, hurtling toward a frozen concrete barrier. Inside the cockpit, the CEO screamed into the radio, her voice fracturing with panic. The engineers froze. Data jumped erratically. The algorithms went silent. Through the blizzard, a man in a worn mechanic's coat stepped from the edge of the ice track. He raised his hand, and time stopped. The Aurora Proving Grounds existed on no public map. 60 miles north of the Arctic Circle, carved from Finnish wilderness, it was where automotive dreams either became legends or died in silence. The winter had arrived early this year, vicious and unforgiving. Temperatures had plunged to -32 Celsius. The test track, 3 miles of precision-engineered asphalt, had transformed into a mirror of compressed ice beneath 6 inches of fresh powder. Inside the command center, a glass-walled structure that jutted from the hillside like a frozen observatory, 27 people monitored screens showing telemetry from the vehicle currently sliding toward oblivion. The Frost 9 prototype represented 18 months of development and $43 million in investment. Matte black carbon fiber. Quad-motor electric drive, an AI system that promised to rewrite the physics of winter driving. The marketing team had already drafted the press release. The car that thinks faster than ice can kill. Victoria Hale sat in the driver's seat, her knuckles white against the steering wheel she no longer controlled. She was 41, a former aerospace engineer who'd climbed to CEO through ruthless competence and an unshakable belief in computational supremacy. She'd insisted on piloting the demonstration herself. Board members, investors, automotive journalists, all watching remotely via encrypted feed. The car had been performing flawlessly for 11 minutes. Acceleration tests, emergency braking on ice, lane changes at 70 kilometers per hour. Victoria had narrated each maneuver with surgical precision, her voice steady as a metronome. Then the rear left tire gave up, not catastrophically. No blowout. Just a gradual loss of cohesion as the rubber compound, stressed beyond its designed temperature threshold, began separating in microscopic layers. The tire's contact patch, already minimal on ice, shrank to nearly nothing. The AI registered the change, calculated, attempted compensation by shifting torque distribution to the other 3 wheels. But the system's response created a new problem. The front right motor now had too much power. The rear right too little. The car began rotating, slowly at first, then with increasing violence. Victoria felt the rotation, tried to correct with steering input. The AI fought her. Traction control cycled 20 times per second, each pulse sending contradictory commands through the drivetrain. The car stopped obeying the laws it had been taught. It became a projectile. "Manual override," Victoria shouted into the helmet microphone. "Give me manual." In the command center, lead engineer Marcus Chen's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Override denied. System won't release authority during active stability intervention. Then kill the stability system. If I do that now..." At this angle, with this rotation, Victoria watched the concrete barrier grow larger through the windshield. Each second stretched into subjective eternity. She could see the texture of the frozen surface, individual snowflakes suspended in her headlight beams. The small sign bolted to the barrier that read, "Absolute Track Limit." Her voice cracked the professional veneer she'd maintained for 2 decades. "Can anyone control this car?" The question echoed through every headset, through the command center, through the heated observation trailer where the board members sat with rapidly cooling coffee, through the phone line connecting to the investment firm that had bet $300 million on this technology. On screen after screen, data continued its frantic dance. Speed, declining but still fatal. Rotation, increasing. Distance to impact, shrinking. The Frost, 9 slid across the ice like a coffin whose lid was coming loose. And nobody, not the engineers, not the AI, not the CEO inside, could stop it. Ethan Cross wiped snow from the wheel of a support vehicle for the 4th time that morning. It was part of his routine. Check tire pressure in the cold that cut through 3 layers of gloves, clear ice from the wheel wells. Make sure the emergency equipment stayed accessible even when weather tried to bury everything. He was 46. Lean in the way men become when they eat efficiently but not abundantly. His face carried lines that suggested he smiled often around one person and rarely around everyone else. He wore insulated coveralls with contract services stenciled on the back, no name, no company logo, just a designation that explained his presence without inviting questions. The other contractors called him the winter guy. The engineers didn't call him anything. Most had never noticed him enough to require a name. He showed up when the snow started falling, worked until spring, then disappeared. Temporary, seasonal, invisible. His station was near the tire warming area, a corrugated metal shelter where wheels were kept at controlled temperatures before installation. It gave him a view of the entire track complex, but kept him away from the important people in the important buildings making important decisions. Ethan preferred it that way. He'd arrived at Aurora 8 weeks ago, driving a 15-year-old pickup with finished plates and a back seat modified for a child's car seat. His interview had lasted 6 minutes. The facilities manager had asked 3 questions. Can you work in extreme cold? Do you have winter driving experience? Are you available through March? Ethan had answered yes to all 3. He didn't mention that his experience included setting 17 lap records on ice circuits across 3 continents. Didn't mention that his signature appeared in the technical manuals of 6 automotive manufacturers. Didn't mention that professional drivers still referenced his analyses of weight transfer dynamics in sub-zero conditions. The facilities manager had handed him a badge, a schedule, and keys to the equipment shed. Nobody knew who he used to be. Nobody asked. At Aurora, the present mattered. The car mattered. The next breakthrough mattered. A contractor who checked tire pressure was furniture that happened to breathe. Ethan pulled his wool cap lower against the wind and began his rounds. Support Vehicle 3. Tires good. Support Vehicle 4. Passenger rear showing early weather cracking. He made a note to recommend replacement. Support Vehicle 5. Someone had left the battery heater unplugged. He connected it before the cold could kill the cells. Through the falling snow, he could see the main track. Saw the Frost 9 launch into its test sequence, watched it dance across the ice with the kind of precision that came from millions of dollars in sensors and processors working in perfect harmony. He knew in the way a surgeon knows when watching someone else botch an incision that the car was seconds away from disaster. Saw it in the tire smoke that shouldn't exist at these temperatures, in the way the vehicle's weight shifted slightly rear bias during the lane change, in the microscopic delay between steering input and response. But Ethan Cross was a contractor who checked tire pressure. His opinion had no weight. His expertise had no value. His past was buried under 8 years of voluntary obscurity. So he stood in the snow, watching a catastrophe develop in slow motion, and did nothing. Until he heard the scream through the emergency channel someone had left active on the equipment shed radio. Inside the heated crew SUV parked near the maintenance area, Lily Cross sat with a blanket over her lap and a book open on her knees. She was 8 years old, with her father's sharp eyes and her late mother's ability to find comfort anywhere. The book was about a girl who discovered she could talk to snowflakes, which Lily found delightfully implausible, but read anyway because the illustrations were beautiful. She glanced at the dashboard clock. 11:47 a.m. Her father would come back at noon. He always came back at noon. Peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, juice box. They'd eat together in the warm car while he asked about her morning lessons. She was homeschooled through an online program, working 2 grades ahead in mathematics and 1 grade ahead in everything else. "How's the pancake queen today?" he'd ask. which was his way of saying good morning even though morning had technically ended. She'd gotten the nickname last Sunday when she'd made a stack of 17 silver-dollar pancakes and eaten exactly 3 before declaring herself retired from competitive breakfast sports. Lily turned the page. The snowflake girl was learning that each flake carried a memory from a cloud, which was poetic but meteorologically questionable. She made a mental note to ask her father if temperature affected crystallization patterns. He knew strange things about how cold worked, the kind of knowledge that came from living in it rather than reading about it. She was safe here. The SUV was parked with its nose toward the exit, engine running, doors unlocked. Her father's emergency protocol. She could drive if she needed to. The basics, anyway. Start, reverse, brake. They'd practiced in empty parking lots during early mornings when nobody could object to an 8-year-old behind the wheel of a 2-ton vehicle. "You're smart enough," he'd told her. And in an emergency, smart beats legal. But there were never emergencies. Just quiet days in cold places where her father fixed things and checked things and made sure other people could do their important work. Then they'd drive to whatever town was nearest, and she'd go to afternoon activities, swimming at 3:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, library time at 4 on Wednesdays, art class at 3 on Fridays. He never missed pickup, not once in 3 years of this nomadic life. Other kids had parents who texted running late or forgot entirely. Lily had a father who treated 3:30 like a law of physics, immutable and absolute. She heard shouting from somewhere in the complex. Probably something normal urgent, the kind of urgent that happened when expensive things didn't behave as predicted. Her father had explained it once. Rich people yell at machines like they're poorly trained dogs. Doesn't mean anyone's in danger. Lily returned to her book. The snowflake girl was learning to read storm warnings. The chapter ended with a blizzard approaching, full of flakes that had forgotten their names. Outside, through glass and steel and swirling snow, her father began walking toward the sound of screaming. Before he was a contractor nobody noticed, Ethan Cross had been someone people couldn't ignore. They'd called him the Ghost of the Apex, a nickname born from his ability to carry more speed through corners than physics should allow. But the real ghost was what he'd become after. A man haunted by the moment precision failed. 16 years ago, he'd been Chief Dynamics Commander for Arcturus Racing, the premier winter motorsport consultancy. He didn't just drive. He decoded. Every track was a language, every surface a dialect. He wrote the technical standards for ice racing safety, trained drivers for 3 Formula One teams, held the teaching certificate that made his signature on a training document legally sufficient for insurance clearance. His specialty was the invisible. Weight transfer, tire load sensitivity, the microsecond delay between input and response that separated control from chaos. He could feel what data couldn't measure, the precise moment when grip would surrender, when a car would transition from obeying to betraying. Professional drivers paid him obscene amounts to sit passenger during their winter training. "Teach me to think like ice," they'd say. He'd take them to the edge of disaster and show them how to dance there. Then Iceland, the Vatnajökull winter circuit, carved across a frozen lake, a demonstration for automotive executives. Ethan was testing a prototype stability system with his longtime co-driver, Marcus Henley. They'd worked together for 11 years. Marcus was more than a colleague. He was the person who understood that racing wasn't about speed. It was about respect for physics. Ethan had flagged a concern during the morning briefing. The air temperature had risen 4 degrees overnight. The lake ice, though still thick enough to support vehicles, had developed a microlayer of meltwater underneath the compacted snow. Invisible, nearly frictionless. "We should postpone," Ethan had said, "or at minimum, reduce speeds by 20%. The lead executive had checked his watch. "We have 18 board members flying in. Media scheduled. This is a $40 million program launch. Then launch it tomorrow. When physics cooperates, The executive had smiled the smile powerful people use when someone technical forgets their place. "Your contract is for driving, Mr. Cross. We'll handle the schedule." Marcus had looked at Ethan across the briefing table. A full conversation in a glance. "I know. Me too. But we've been overruled before." They'd driven. The first 4 laps went perfectly. The 5th lap, Marcus was at the wheel, attacking a sweeping left-hander at 140 kilometers per hour. The weight transfer Ethan had predicted arrived exactly as calculated. The micro layer of meltwater did what water does under pressure and temperature. It provided 0 friction. The car left the track, hit the ice barrier. The barrier, weakened by the same temperature rise Ethan had warned about, shattered. Fell through rotten ice into water so cold it stopped the heart before drowning could finish the job. They pulled Marcus out 17 minutes later. Ethan had gone in after him, had gotten both hands on his friend's jacket, had felt the current pulling them both down. Rescue divers had made a choice: save the one who was still fighting. Ethan had climbed out onto ice that shouldn't have existed, lay there breathing air he didn't deserve. Watched them cover Marcus with a silver emergency blanket that became a shroud. The investigation cleared Ethan of all fault. His warning was in the written record. His recommendation was documented. He'd done everything correctly, which somehow made it worse. He'd walked away from Arctic racing 3 weeks later, turned down consulting offers, coaching positions, executive roles. His wife, Sarah, had tried to understand. "You can't quit being who you are," she'd said. "Watch me," he'd replied. For 5 years, he rebuilt himself as something smaller, taught high school physics, fixed neighbors' cars, learned to be ordinary. Then, Sarah got sick the fast kind, the kind that steals months when you'd expected years. She died with Lily holding one hand and Ethan holding the other, in a hospice room that smelled like lavender and defeat. After the funeral, Ethan sold the house, put everything in storage, took Lily and started moving short-term contracts in cold places. Always winter work, always far from circuits and timing systems, and the kind of speed that killed people you loved. He'd buried his racing gloves in the snow beside Marcus's memorial. Buried his certifications, his reputation, his name. Became a ghost again, but a different kind. The kind that couldn't hurt anyone because nobody knew it was there, until a CEO screamed a question that cracked through 8 years of carefully constructed invisibility. Victoria Hale had been certain about 3 things when she took control of Hyperion Automotive Systems. Cars would become computers, computers would become superior to human instinct, and she would be the person who proved it. Her PhD from MIT focused on machine learning applications in dynamic environments. Her master's thesis had predicted with uncomfortable accuracy which traditional manufacturers would fail to adapt to electrification. She'd spent 6 years at a major tech company building autonomous systems, then left when she realized the leadership feared disruption more than they loved innovation. Hyperion gave her complete authority. The board had been explicit. "Show us the future. Make us believe it." The Frost. 9 was her answer. Not just electric, not just fast intelligent. The AI system she developed didn't just respond to conditions, it anticipated them. Predictive physics modeling, real-time grip estimation, sensor fusion that processed data from 14 sources simultaneously. "We're not building a car," she'd told investors. "We're building a response organism, something that thinks in microseconds and acts before danger materializes." The winter testing was meant to be the ultimate proof. Ice was pure chaos, a surface that changed moment to moment, where traditional stability systems failed because they reacted too slowly. Her AI would see the chaos coming, would feel the surface through vibration analysis, temperature sensors, microscopic wheel slip calculations. It would be better than human instinct because it couldn't panic, couldn't doubt, couldn't hesitate. She'd insisted on driving the demonstration herself. partly because she believed in the technology absolutely, partly because leadership meant being first in line when you asked others to trust your vision, mostly because she needed to feel it the moment when machine intelligence exceeded human limitation. The test had started flawlessly. Every scenario Victoria executed, the AI handled with supernatural precision. Acceleration on glare ice, perfect traction management, emergency braking from speed, straight-line stability that defied the surface. High-speed lane changes, the car moving like it could see 5 seconds into the future. She'd felt vindicated. Triumphant, had allowed herself a smile as she narrated the feed. Current speed, 112 kilometers per hour, executing high-frequency slalom. 0 stability interventions required. Then, something shifted. Subtle at first, a slight delay in the steering response. A microscopic vibration through the seat that her engineer's instinct recognized as wrong. The rear of the car stepped out, just a degree. Then, 2 degrees. The AI compensated again, each compensation creating a new problem that required correction. The car began oscillating, each swing wider than the last. Victoria tried to intervene. The AI blocked her. Its programming was absolute. Human input during automated emergency response constituted a safety risk. The system was designed to save drivers from themselves. She watched her creation wrestle with physics and lose. Felt the moment when rotation became unrecoverable. Heard her own voice break professional decorum and scream the question that would define her career. Can anyone control this car? In that moment, hurtling toward frozen concrete at 70 kilometers per hour, Victoria Hale understood the flaw in her certainty. Computers processed data, humans processed meaning. And in winter, in chaos, in the space between calculation and catastrophe, meaning mattered more. The AI had data. It didn't have wisdom. Couldn't tell the difference between a problem it should solve and a problem it should surrender. Through the windshield, through the snow, through the narrowing seconds, Victoria saw the barrier approaching. Saw her future either very short or very humbling, crystallizing in the matte gray concrete. The impact would kill her. Or the impact would be avoided through some miracle she couldn't calculate. Either way, she'd been wrong. Catastrophically, publicly, fatally wrong. The car slid. The AI cycled through solutions. The barrier waited. And somewhere outside, in the cold she'd barely noticed while building the future, someone raised their hand. The catastrophic failure began with a piece of rubber 37 millimeters wide. The rear left tire of the Frost 9 had been mounted that morning at 6:15 a.m., properly torqued, properly balanced, inflated to the precise pressure specified for -30-degree operation. The compound was a specialized winter formulation, designed to remain pliable in conditions that turned normal rubber into plastic-hard uselessness. But there were limits, always limits. The compound needed temperature cycling periods of warming between cold exposure to maintain molecular structure. The Frost 9 had been running continuously for 47 minutes. The tire's surface temperature, constantly refreshed by friction with ice, stayed within acceptable range. But the internal temperature, especially at the sidewall where flexing concentrated stress, had fallen below the compound's glass transition threshold. At the molecular level, the rubber began failing. Polymer chains that should slide past each other began fracturing. The sidewall lost compliance. The contact patch, already minimal on ice, shrank further as the tire became unable to deform and conform to microscopic surface irregularities. Grip vanished. The AI registered the change within 3 milliseconds. Wheel speed sensors detected the rear left spinning 0.3% faster than the others. Accelerometers measured a lateral shift in the vehicle's center of gravity. The navigation system calculated deviation from the intended path. The response was immediate and algorithmic. Reduce torque to the spinning wheel, increase torque to wheels with better grip. apply microsecond braking pulses to arrest the slide. In normal conditions, dry pavement, even wet pavement, this would work, had worked in 10,000 test iterations. But ice isn't normal. Ice is binary. You have grip or you don't, and the transition between states happens faster than algorithms can process context. The torque shift to compensate for the rear left created catastrophic overload on the front right motor. Suddenly, carrying 60% of the total drive force, the front right tire broke traction. Now, two wheels were slipping, diagonally opposed. The car began rotating around its center axis. The AI detected the rotation, attempted correction by commanding countersteer through the electronic steering system. But Victoria, trained through decades of driving, was already applying her own countersteer input. Human and machine fought for the same steering wheel. The steering rack, receiving contradictory commands 20 times per second, began oscillating. The front wheels twitched left, left, like a seizure. Each twitch destroyed a little more of the tire's tenuous grip. In the command center, Marcus Chen watched telemetry go haywire. We've got conflicting authority, the AI won't release control, manual override is locked out during active intervention. His colleague, Dr. Sarah Vance, stared at the stability system display. It's cycling through every available strategy. Braking, torque vectoring, even trying suspension stiffness adjustment. Nothing's working because it can't accept that the correct answer is do less. How do we tell a computer to have instinct? We don't. We hope. But hope wasn't a control system. And instinct wasn't programmable. The Frost 9 continued its rotation, sliding sideways now, a 2-ton projectile on ice that had stopped pretending to be a surface you could drive on. Victoria felt the helplessness that comes when skill becomes irrelevant. She was a passenger in her own vehicle, watching through the windshield as the barrier rotated into view. Then, the landscape. Then, the barrier again. The AI's final attempt at salvation came 60 meters from impact. It commanded maximum braking on all 4 wheels simultaneously, a desperate, last-resort effort to arrest momentum through pure friction. On ice, it was suicide. All 4 tires locked. The car transitioned from rotating to straight-line sliding, now pointed directly at the barrier. Speed, 68 kilometers per hour. Distance, 50 meters. Physics was no longer complicated. This was simple vector mechanics. Force, mass, immovable object. Victoria's hands went dead on the steering wheel. No input she could provide mattered. The car had become a coffin on rails, tracking toward impact with mathematical certainty. She thought about her daughter, 22, graduating medical school next year. About her father, who'd told her the automotive industry was no place for someone who trusted equations more than experience. About Marcus Henley, the engineer who'd been killed during a winter test in Iceland years ago, whose death had prompted 17 new safety regulations that didn't apply when AI controlled the vehicle. The barrier filled her vision. Frost-covered concrete, absolutely solid. Time did the strange thing it does before impact. Stretched. She could count her heartbeats, could see individual snowflakes spiraling in her headlights, could read the safety warning stenciled on the barrier. The AI made no sound as it failed. Just continued processing, calculating, attempting solutions that no longer existed. Victoria Hale closed her eyes and waited for the physics she'd spent a career studying to deliver their verdict. Ethan Cross had been walking toward his daughter when he heard the scream through the radio. The equipment shed monitor, normally playing weather forecasts, had been accidentally left on the emergency frequency. Someone in the command center had keyed their microphone during the crisis. The CEO's voice, stripped of composure, asking if anyone could save her. Ethan stopped walking, stood in snow that was already filling his footprints. His daughter was warm, safe, waiting. The test track was someone else's problem, someone else's emergency, someone else's catastrophe that he'd predicted and been powerless to prevent. He could go back to Lily, eat lunch, ask about snowflakes, Be the father who always showed up, always kept promises, always chose the small safe world over the complicated dangerous one. He turned toward the track. Security barriers prevented access during active testing. Yellow and black striped gates, hydraulically operated, designed to stop vehicles. Ethan went around them, walking along the snow-covered margin where support equipment usually staged. A security guard, young, wearing an orange vest, stepped into his path. "Sir, track is closed. You need to." Ethan raised one hand. Not aggressive, not threatening. Just a gesture that carried absolute authority. The kind of authority that comes from having stood on podiums and written regulations and held responsibility for other people's lives. "Move," Ethan said. One word. Quiet. The guard moved. Through the blizzard, Ethan could see the frost, 9 sliding toward disaster, could calculate the vectors, the time to impact, the exact moment when intervention would transition from possible to pointless. He had maybe 12 seconds. His radio, the basic contractor unit clipped to his belt, had emergency override capability. Every radio on site did, in case of fire, medical emergency, or immediate danger requiring instant communication across all channels. Ethan keyed the override. His transmission would reach every headset, every speaker, every device currently active on Aurora's communication network, including the one in Victoria Hale's helmet. "Driver," he said, voice calm as glass. "Acknowledge." In the command center, people looked at each other. That voice hadn't been in any briefing. Wasn't on any personnel list. Calm when it should be panicking. Authoritative when it should be asking permission. Victoria heard it through her helmet speakers, cutting across the chaos. She opened her eyes. "Who? No names. Time is physics. Do you want to live? Then stop helping." It made no sense. She was fighting for control, hands desperate on the wheel, feet searching for brake pedal authority the AI had stolen. But something in that voice, the flat certainty, the complete absence of doubt, made Victoria force her hands to relax. Ethan watched the car's body language, saw the moment Victoria surrendered control. The vehicle's oscillation damped slightly. The AI, no longer fighting human input, settled into a single strategy, which was still wrong. But now there was space to work. "Command center," Ethan transmitted. "Kill, stability control. All driver assists. Return to manual steering." Marcus Chen's voice came back. "Negative. System is locked in protective mode. We can't. Emergency override code is 774 Alpha. Enter it." "How do you know our emergency?" "Because I wrote the certification standard your system is based on." "Enter the code." Marcus's fingers moved. The code worked. On his screen, every safety system indicator turned from green to amber to red as assists dropped offline. Inside the frost, 9, Victoria felt the steering wheel come alive in her hands, felt the brake pedal respond to pressure. The AI released control like a drowning person letting go of a rescuer who'd become an anchor. 40 meters from the barrier. Speed. 60 kilometers per hour. Ethan's voice returned. Still calm. Still certain. First command. Throttle off. Engine brake only. No friction brakes yet. Victoria's instinct screamed to brake hard, immediately, with everything available. But that voice, it had the quality of truth. She lifted off the accelerator completely. Second command. Steering to center. Hands loose. Let the car tell you where it wants to go. This was insane. The car was pointed at concrete death. But Victoria centered the wheel, relaxed her grip, felt the front wheels, suddenly freed from input confusion, find a microsecond of grip. Third command. Look far. Not at the wall. At where you want to be after the wall doesn't kill you. 25 meters. Speed, 54 kilometers per hour. Victoria forced her eyes away from the barrier. Looked left, toward the gentle curve of track that led away from disaster. Her hands, responding to where her eyes focused, made a minute steering correction. The front wheels, barely gripping, transmitted that correction into a vector change. 2 degrees. Then 3. Now brake. Smooth. No stabbing. Squeeze. Victoria applied pressure. Steady, progressive, fighting every instinct that demanded violent action. The wheels stayed barely below lockup threshold. The car bled speed, 15 meters. Speed, 41 kilometers per hour. The car continued its gentle arc. Not enough. Still pointed too far toward the barrier. But the angle was changing, degree by degree, purchased with each meter of distance. 8 meters. Speed, 34 kilometers per hour. Ethan's voice came once more. You're going to make it. Maintain pressure. Keep your eyes where you want to be. 5 meters. Speed, 28 kilometers per hour. The Frost, 9, rotated past the barrier's leading edge. The right side mirror extended 3 inches from the body, impacted the concrete. Sheared off instantly, plastic and electronics exploding into fragments. But the car continued past. Behind the barrier, into the runoff area. Sliding, still rotating, but no longer on an impact trajectory. Victoria kept her foot steady on the brake. The car came to rest 30 meters past the barrier, pointed backward on the track, steam rising from the brakes despite the brutal cold. She sat in absolute silence, hands still on the wheel, foot still on the brake, breathing in ragged gasps that fogged her helmet visor. Through the snow, through the chaos, a voice on the radio. You can let go now. Victoria released the wheel. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't unclip her harness. Someone was running toward the car. Multiple someones. Command center staff, medical team, security. But Ethan Cross was already walking away, back toward the warm SUV where his daughter was waiting with a book about snowflakes, wondering if her father would be late for lunch. The video replay would be analyzed by 14 separate investigation teams over the following 6 weeks. Frame-by-frame examination of how disaster became survival. Engineers would write papers. Safety boards would update regulations. Insurance companies would revise their actuarial models for AI-controlled vehicles in extreme conditions. But none of the analysis would capture what happened in those 9 seconds between catastrophe and control. Marcus Chen played the replay for the 7th time, watching the telemetry data synchronized with the voice recording. The unknown contractor's commands overlaid on graphs showing steering angle, brake pressure, speed, lateral acceleration, throttle off, engine brake only. On the graph, Victoria's initial instinct to stab the brakes showed as a sharp pressure spike, then nothing as she forced herself to comply. The car's speed began bleeding off through rolling resistance and motor regeneration alone, slower than friction braking, but smoother. More importantly, the wheels stayed rotating, maintaining the tiny contact with ice that meant steering input could still matter. Steering to center, hands loose. The steering angle trace showed Victoria's panicked oscillations, left, right, left, fighting for correction that made things worse. Then a return to neutral. For 2 full seconds, the angle stayed dead center. During those 2 seconds, the front tires, no longer confused by contradictory inputs, found fragments of grip, microscopic, insufficient for dramatic change, but enough to establish a vector that wasn't directly at the wall. Look far. Not at the wall. This was the command that separated training from wisdom. Every human instinct focuses on the threat, the danger, the imminent impact. Target fixation, the phenomenon where you steer toward whatever you're looking at. Pilots died from it. Motorcyclists crashed because of it. Drivers hit the exact obstacle they were trying to avoid. The telemetry showed Victoria's hands making a minute steering correction, barely 2 degrees, that her conscious mind probably didn't register. But her hands followed her eyes, and her eyes were looking at survival rather than death. That 2-degree change became 3 degrees of vehicle rotation. 3 degrees was the difference between mirror-scraping survival and full-impact catastrophe. Now brake. Smooth. The brake pressure trace showed Victoria applying force in a perfect exponential curve, exactly what advanced racing schools taught, but most drivers couldn't execute under pressure. Maximum deceleration without locking wheels. The car shed speed in the most efficient possible way while maintaining the tiny steering authority that kept it arcing past the barrier. Dr. Sarah Vance, the AI systems architect, stared at the data. He gave 3 commands. 3. Our AI executed 17,000 calculations during the same time period. But his 3 commands, executed in that sequence, worked better than anything we computed. Because they weren't calculations, Marcus said. They were understanding. He knew what ice does, what fear does, what trying too hard does. The AI had data. He had wisdom. Who is he? Marcus pulled up the contractor database, searching for anyone matching the voice profile and radio signature. The emergency override code led to a single credential. Advanced Safety Certification, Nordic Region, issued 14 years ago. The certification holder's name was listed as E. That certification level doesn't exist anymore, Sarah said. They stopped issuing them when they couldn't find anyone qualified to teach the teachers. Marcus ran the name through the industry database. What came back made him stand up from his chair. Sweet God, that's Ethan Cross, the ghost of the Apex. He's here. He's been here for 2 months. We've had a living legend checking tire pressure. Sarah pulled up the archived records. Racing championships. Technical papers that were still cited in current research. Testimony before safety boards. Then, nothing. A complete disappearance from public record 8 years ago. Why would someone with that background take a contractor job at a proving ground? Marcus closed the files. Same reason anyone disappears. Because something broke them, and they needed to become someone else. Outside, through the command center windows, they could see the contractor in question walking through the snow. Not toward the crash scene. Not toward the celebration that was beginning as people realized everyone had survived. Walking toward an old pickup truck with a child's car seat visible through the rear window. Victoria Hale's legs wouldn't support her weight when she finally climbed from the frost. 9. 2 medical technicians caught her, lowered her to sit on the car's door sill while they ran assessment protocols. Blood pressure elevated but normalizing. Pupils reactive. No visible injuries beyond psychological shock. Around her, the proving ground had transformed into controlled chaos. Every member of the engineering team was outside, standing in snow that was already ankle-deep, staring at the car that should have been wreckage. The board members were still on video conference, their faces frozen in expressions somewhere between relief and horror. The automotive journalists had more questions than their recording devices could capture. But nobody was talking. The usual post-incident debrief chatter, nervous energy releasing through technical analysis was absent. People stood in small clusters, looking at each other, looking at the car, looking at the scarred concrete barrier with fresh paint transfer showing exactly how close death had come. Victoria's hands finally stopped shaking enough to remove her helmet. Her hair was plastered to her skull with sweat despite the temperature. She looked at Marcus Chen, who'd run from the command center still wearing his headset. The voice on the radio, she said. Who was he? Marcus hesitated. The truth seemed impossible. A contractor, seasonal maintenance worker. He's been here since December. Contractors don't have emergency override codes. Contractors don't tell CEOs how to cheat death in 3 sentences. This one apparently does. Victoria looked past the crash scene, toward the support area where equipment vehicles were parked. Through the snow, she could see a figure in worn coveralls walking toward an old pickup truck. Not running, not celebrating, just walking, like a man who'd completed an ordinary task and was returning to an ordinary day. Get him, Victoria said. Immediately. I don't care if you have to physically drag him back. I need to know who I just listened to. Two security staff started toward the pickup, but they were too slow, too far away. The truck's engine started. Brake lights flared. The vehicle began backing up. Victoria forced herself to stand, waved off the medical technicians, and started walking, then jogging, then running through snow that tried to steal her balance with each step. She reached the parking area as the truck completed its turn toward the exit road. "Wait," she shouted. "Please." The truck stopped. The driver's window lowered 3 inches. Victoria reached the door, breathing hard. Through the gap, she could see the contractor's face clearly for the first time. Mid-40s, weathered by cold and time. Eyes that had seen things, calculated things, understood things that most people never approached. "I need to know your name," she said. "Ethan Cross. It's on my personnel file." "That's not what I mean." Marcus told me. Told me who you used to be. The ghost of the Apex. Chief Dynamics Commander. You wrote the standards my AI was supposedly following. Ethan said nothing. "You saved my life with 3 sentences. How?" "You saved your life by listening." "Most people don't. I want to hire you." "Immediately. Full position. Director of Safety Systems. Name your terms." From the back seat, a young voice. "Dad? Are we having lunch late?" Victoria looked past Ethan, saw the girl with a book on her lap, completely unaware that her father had just prevented a death. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. "No, sweetheart. Right on time." He looked back at Victoria. "I appreciate the offer, Miss Hale, but I have a prior commitment. I'm offering you the chance to reshape an entire industry, to prevent what almost happened today from ever happening again. To matter. I matter to one person." That's sufficient. Victoria felt the rejection like physics, immovable, absolute. But she'd survived today by accepting wisdom when it contradicted her assumptions. Then, consultant role. Part-time. Whatever schedule works. "I can't go back in that car, or any car we build, without understanding what you know." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Finally, "I'll consider it. But I have conditions. No travel. No overnight commitments. Nothing that interferes with 3:30 p.m. on weekdays." "What happens at 3:30? "My daughter's swimming lesson. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Non-negotiable." Victoria almost laughed would have if her hands weren't still trembling. She'd just offered a man the chance to define the future of automotive safety, and his counteroffer was constrained by a child's swim schedule. "Deal," she said. "Whatever you need. We'll work around 3:30. Ethan nodded once. Put the truck in gear. Then paused. "Miss Hale, your AI didn't fail because it was stupid. It failed because it couldn't accept limits, couldn't surrender. Sometimes the right answer is admitting you don't have the right answer. That's not a bug, it's wisdom. You can't program it." The window rose. The truck drove away, leaving tracks in fresh snow that were already beginning to fill. Victoria stood in the parking area, watching taillights disappear into the blizzard. Behind her, the proving ground was beginning its transformation back to normal operations. Engineers returning to terminals, medical team packing equipment, security documenting the scene. But nothing was normal. She'd brought the future to a frozen lake in Finland and watched it nearly kill her. The man who'd saved her life was driving away in a 15-year-old truck because his daughter needed lunch. Marcus approached, carrying Victoria's personal phone. "The board is asking if you want to continue testing today or postpone until—" "Postpone," Victoria said. "Indefinitely. We're not testing anything until we understand what we don't understand." "And the AI development program?" Victoria looked at the Frost 9, still sitting where it had come to rest. 23 million in development. 3 years of programming. The most sophisticated stability system ever created for a production vehicle. all of it insufficient to handle 9 seconds of reality. "We continue," she said. "But we're adding a new team member, someone who can teach us the difference between calculation and comprehension." She walked back toward the command center, legs steadier now, mind already racing through implications. Her career had nearly ended on Finnish ice. Instead, it had transformed. She'd learned that certainty was dangerous, that wisdom lived in unexpected places, that the future she was building needed foundations she'd ignored. Behind her, the Frost 9 sat silent in the snow. Inside its computers, diagnostic logs were recording every millisecond of what had happened, data that would be analyzed for months. But the real lesson, the one that mattered, wasn't in the data. It was in the memory of a voice in the chaos, calm as winter, telling her the hardest thing for any human or machine to accept: stop helping. Let go. Trust physics more than fear. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon at 3:17 p.m., Ethan Cross sat in the Aurora facility's parking lot with his truck running and his daughter beside him. They were early for swimming, which gave them time for their routine. Hot chocolate from the thermos, discussion of the day's lessons, and whatever question Lily had saved up. Today's question: why did that lady want to give you a big job? Ethan had known this conversation was coming. Lily paid attention to things adults assumed children missed. She'd noticed the increased number of people who stopped him during his rounds, the way the facilities manager now greeted him by first name, the envelope marked confidential, consulting agreement that had arrived last week. "Because I know things about cars and ice," Ethan said, "and she wants to learn those things. Are you going to teach her?" "Sometimes, when it doesn't interfere with important stuff." "Like swimming?" "Exactly like swimming." Lily considered this while drinking her hot chocolate with the careful precision of someone who knew spills in a car meant cleanup work. "Dad, did you used to do the car stuff all the time?" Before. The word Lily used to describe the time when her mother was alive, when they lived in one house, when her father's job had a name that appeared in articles and racing programs. "I did," Ethan said. "It was my whole life, pretty much." "Was it fun?" "Sometimes. But it took up all my time. And after your mom got sick, I realized I'd traded time for other things. Important things like jobs and respect and people saying my name. But time is the only thing you can't get back." "So you quit?" "I chose different. Not bigger, not more important. Just different." Lily finished her hot chocolate, screwed the cup back onto the thermos with the counterclockwise precision Ethan had taught her lefty Lucy, and looked at her father with an expression too old for 8 years. "I'm glad you chose different. The other kids at swimming have dads who are always late. I like that you're always exactly on time." Ethan felt something in his chest tighten and release simultaneously. "Me too, kiddo." They drove to the community center, arriving at 3:28. Lily changed in the locker room while Ethan sat in the observation area where parents waited. Other fathers checked phones, worked on laptops, made themselves productive during the dead hour of children's activities. Ethan watched his daughter swim, noted her improving stroke efficiency, saw her laugh with another girl during a break, watched her dive for rings at the pool's bottom with the fearlessness that came from trusting the world wouldn't hurt her. His phone buzzed. Text from Victoria Hale. "Reviewing stability system modifications. Would value your input on compromise between AI authority and driver override. Available tomorrow 10 a.m. Ethan typed back, "Yes. I'll be at facility 0730 to 1000. 500. Another text. "You could probably work remotely. I can have equipment sent to your location." Ethan looked at his daughter in the pool. Considered the question Victoria wasn't asking. Why do you insist on being present? Why commute to a facility when the work could happen anywhere? He typed, "Wisdom is contextual. I need to feel the cold, see the ice, remember what matters. Can't do that remotely." 3 dots appeared, indicating Victoria was composing a response. They disappeared, reappeared. Finally. Understood. Thank you. Lily's swimming lesson ended at 4:30. They drove back to the small apartment Ethan rented by the week, one of those corporate housing units designed for temporary workers. 2 bedrooms, basic kitchen, furniture that belonged to nobody and everybody. They'd lived in 11 similar apartments across 4 countries since Sarah died. Dinner was simple: pasta, vegetables, fruit. Lily told stories about the Snowflake book, which had concluded with the girl learning that every flake's memory eventually became part of an ocean. "It's metaphorically interesting," Lily said, using words that suggested she'd been reading above her grade level again, but hydrologically questionable. After dinner, homework. Ethan checked her mathematics she'd completed next week's assignments and her composition draft about winter adaptation in animals. "You should add a section about humans," he suggested. "We're winter animals too. We just use tools instead of fur. At 8, bedtime routine. Teeth, pajamas. The weighted blanket Lily preferred." Ethan sat on the edge of her bed. "Dad?" Lily asked. "When we move to the next place, will I still do swimming? If there's a pool. If not, we'll find something else you like. What if I wanted to stay somewhere? Like, not move for a whole year?" Ethan looked at his daughter, wondering when she'd become wise enough to ask questions he couldn't easily answer. They moved because permanence meant commitment, and commitment meant vulnerability. If you never planted roots, you never had to watch them tear. But Lily was growing. Eventually, she'd need more than serial temporary apartments and activities that reset every 3 months. "Would you like to stay somewhere?" he asked. "Maybe." Competition meant commitment, meant showing up regardless of contract status, meant becoming part of something that continued whether you were ready or not. "Let me think about it," Ethan said. "Okay." He turned off the light, left the door cracked 3 inches Lily's preferred configuration, walked to the apartment's single window and looked out at snow falling through streetlight. His phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from Marcus Chen. "Victoria told me about your consulting arrangement. Want you to know. Marcus Henley was my mentor. He trained me before transferring to Arcturus. His death changed how I think about systems and safety. Having you involved means something. Thank you." Ethan stared at the text. Marcus had trained people all over the industry. His influence extended through dozens of engineers who'd learned that safety wasn't about preventing every accident, it was about respecting the space between confidence and catastrophe. He typed back. "Marcus knew more than I did about teaching. I just knew more about ice. Together, we almost had enough wisdom. I miss him. We all do. But he'd be glad you're still here, still contributing." Ethan pocketed the phone and returned to watching snow accumulate. Somewhere out there, the Frost 9 sat in a heated facility, undergoing modifications based on lessons learned in 9 seconds. Victoria and her team were rebuilding their AI with new parameters: uncertainty acknowledgement, authority surrender protocols, human override prioritization. They'd asked Ethan to help write the standards, define the moment when machines should stop trying to help, create the framework for systems that could admit limits. It was important work. World-changing work. The kind of work he'd abandoned 8 years ago. But at 3:30 tomorrow, he'd leave it unfinished and drive to a pool where his daughter practiced backstroke. Because wisdom wasn't just knowing when to intervene, it was knowing when intervention wasn't needed. Lily didn't need a famous father. She needed a present father. The snow continued falling. Each flake with its own crystalline structure, its own path from cloud to ground. Individual. Temporary. Part of something larger that would melt and reform and continue regardless of any single snowflake's trajectory. Ethan thought about the ghost of the apex, the reputation, the records, the name that still appeared in racing archives. That person was gone, had died on Icelandic ice alongside Marcus Henley. What remained was something smaller, quieter, less celebrated, but also more deliberate, more present, more capable of choosing Wednesday afternoon, swimming over Thursday morning glory. Victoria had offered him authority over an entire program. He'd counter-offered with a 3:30 boundary. Most people would call that limiting. Ethan called it wisdom. Real power wasn't controlling a car at the edge of disaster. Real power was knowing which edges mattered and which ones you could walk away from. The snow fell. His daughter slept. Tomorrow he'd wake early, check tire pressure in sub-zero cold, consult on systems that could save lives, and leave exactly at 3:15 to be on time for swimming. It wasn't the life people would write about, wasn't the legacy that built legends, but it was the life that let him sleep through the night without seeing Marcus's face under that silver blanket. And that, finally, after 8 years of searching through cold places, felt like enough.